This morning I'm talking about discrimination, the self versus the non-self. I've been thinking about this all week, actually, but especially the drive over here. I always have these insights, on the drive over here. And I was thinking, to understand the difference between the self and the not self, you first have to believe that you have a soul. You have a divine spark within you. And once you believe that, then the next step is a huge step, because the reason it's huge is that the majority of people who believe they have a soul think they're saved, that they don't have to change, that they are divine, or whatever approach they're taking in their understanding of having a soul. But the ageless wisdom tells us that, first of all, we have to give birth to that divinity. We have to give birth to our unfolding human soul. Once we give birth to our unfolding human soul, then we need to create a path for it to unfold. And I think that's the root of the word potential. So we have potential. That potential doesn't all of a sudden fall out of heaven, descend upon our beingness, and we are our potential. It just doesn't work that way. So this is what I've been thinking about. And this morning's talk is how to discriminate between the capital S or uppercase S self and the lower self. The lower self is the expression of our personality that just is. It's instinctive, it's accumulated and inherited actions and activities and experiences and thoughts over many, many, many incarnations without consciously knowing it. It just absorbs. The personality just absorbs and records all of these events. And then with each incarnation, we act out. We act out on those recordings, those experiences from millions of years ago. This is why some people are so coarse and self-centered and think that they are the end-all be-all. And they're like that from the time, they're teenagers until the time they die. Then there's us. It says, oh no, I'm looking at the not self. And it's just not what I want to be. That's the awakening. And the path that we put our beautiful divinity on, in the recognition that we have this great potential, but we have to bring that potential into expression. And the bringing it into expression is through the recognition that we are greater than our lower nature, greater than the not self. So let me begin with the basics. The small s self is the sum total of the physical, emotional, mental bodies that we all have. In the esoteric teaching, it is commonly called the lower self or the personality. Physical, emotional, mental bodies. Personality, lower self. Then we have the uppercase self, uppercase capital S self, which is the divinity within us. It is a source of light. It is a source of love. This divinity within us is the source of love and the source of power. Light, love, and power. So the capital S self is another term that we use to refer to the core of our being. The true self is our developing, unfolding human soul who is trying to liberate himself, return to Shambhala, and become the expression of his true self. And therefore is the purpose of our life. It's not the accumulation of money. It's not all the things that we have, all the stuff we have. It's not our career or our profession. It is how we take all of these things and use them to help the progress or the unfoldment of our divine self. Right? To help liberate our human soul, we are encouraged to practice the science of observation. Observation is part of the fundamental practices of one who is traveling on the spiritual path. There are disciplines. Now, some people run from the word discipline, particularly starting about the age of 14. When we have a Saturn in opposition to Saturn in our chart, it said we defy authority. Some people never grow out of that Saturn cycle. They just stay there. They're stuck there. But the point is, if we do want to progress, it requires some discipline. And so here we've been given a discipline. It's a lifelong discipline. It's not temporary or a short-lived discipline. It's one of those lifetime disciplines, and it is called the science of observation. And it is a fundamental practice for us. The science of observation is this. It is careful observation without criticism. Without criticism. There's your first test. Who has eliminated negative criticism from their thinking process? Well, we have to do that. Constructive criticism, well, you're walking a fine line there. If you are spiritually mature, then constructive criticism is of value. But if you are still stuck in the not self, don't fool yourself and say, I'm constructive in my criticism of you. So be careful. It is careful observation without criticism, without self-condemnation. So it's not only without condemnation of others, it is also without self-condemnation that we are going to practice the science of observation. The next thing is without pity. Without pity. Without identification, and that's a key one. Careful observation. Science of observation is careful observation without identification. It is simply to observe yourself with clear observation and to learn to know how and why of the activities of your mind. To know how and why. To know how and why of those activities of your mind. So the science of observation is a mental exercise. To observe without identification means that the moment you identify yourself with different activities, emotions, words, or thoughts, do you know what happens? We lose ourselves in those emotions and words and thoughts. We lose ourselves in them, and then our level goes down accordingly. This is why we're still on this wheel of rebirth. It does not matter what you are or where you are at any given time, but how much and how far you can observe your little self. Let's just pause here and think about humanity today. How many citizens of humanity are practicing the science of observation? Not many, and I truly believe the reason behind it is ego and vanity. Ego and vanity precludes the desire to change yourself, precludes the recognition that your life could be better. And better does not mean materially better, but spiritually better. Spiritually better means that now the true self is beginning to manifest into your thoughts and your words and your actions and your feelings, in your career, in your profession, in your relationships, that finally that true self is coming into manifestation. When you practice the science of observation continuously, soon you begin to recognize the difference between the expression of your true self and the stupidity of the personality nature. Observation helps you create right relations with others, and observation helps you correct yourself. It is the human soul who carries on the process of observation. See, it's not our logical mind. It is the human soul. So the more advanced our human soul, the greater is his field of observation. Should I repeat that? The more advanced our soul, the greater is the field of our soul's observation. Discrimination. I'm bringing discrimination in because that's really the key word of the whole talk this morning. So discrimination is our ability to make right choices. Seems really simple. To choose the right thing, to choose the right direction, the right time, so we don't fall into the hands of ugliness and evil and injustice and misery. That's discrimination. To choose the right thing, the right direction at the right time. Right thing, right direction, right time. If we can practice this kind of discrimination, then we're not going to fall into the hands of ugliness and evil and injustice and misery. Christ brought the principle of discrimination. This is a quote. Christ brought the principle of discrimination and called it his sword. Imagine that when we see that symbol, which is the sword, that this is the symbol of discrimination that Christ gave to us. It is this sword that paves our way on the path of liberation. So discrimination is the ability to know which things are useful, and which things are useless. Imagine the amount of time we would save in our life if we practice this discrimination. If we could recognize and know things that are useful to us on this path of releasing our soul from its personality, from the accumulation of many, 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 many incarnations that keep us stuck and buried in all of that debris. So, discrimination, we begin to practice discrimination through the science of observation. To know which things are beneficial and which things are harmful. To know this. If you have that Buddhic body at least constructed in its, let me say, in its etheric form. In other words, it's just in the process of coming into manifestation. That intuitive body, what that means is that your divine spark is now responsive to the spiritual triad. Imagine that. It means that we now have the antakarana vibrating in such a way that what we say and do and what we think, what we choose and our right timing and so forth, this right direction, is now the result of a resonance that occurs when this antakarana bridge is built. And the best way for me that I can explain that kind of resonance is through a musical instrument. Because I used to be a violinist. I guess once you are, you always are. I just don't have a violin anymore. But there are 4 strings on a violin. Then you have a piece of wood, that you put the 4 strings on, and tuning keys and so forth. But the key thing for that whole violin is the quality of the wood and the sound post that puts the top and the bottom part of the violin together. If that sound post, which would be the antakarana bridge, is in the right place, then all the strings, as the soul is playing, the strings are in harmony and cooperation, which creates a resonance and brings out the true self through all of your entire being. Imagine. So you become this beautiful musical instrument upon which your true self can express itself. It is the light of intuition which reveals the most essential for our evolution. It reveals the motives of people. Well, until you have purified and harmonized the strings of your instrument and that bridge is now built, you're not going to recognize the motives of people. You'll be recognizing your own motives. You speak through your bias and your opinion and the accumulations of your many, many lifetimes that are stored in the atoms of your consciousness. But once you practice discrimination and you begin to have that discipline, the science of observation, so well practiced that now you are in the process of making sure that that Antakarana bridge is constructed in such a way that there is a resonance that will help reveal to you the motives of people. It reveals the needs of others. It reveals the right way to meet the needs. Now, somebody may say, "You're not meeting my need." And when you tell a teacher, "You're not meeting my need," the teacher is going to smile because the teacher recognizes that they don't know what their need is because they want their personality needs to be satisfied. Whereas the teacher is trying to meet the needs of the soul. And this is why in Challenge for Discipleship, the book Challenge for Discipleship, it says the teacher needs to have what? Nerves of steel. Exactly. Those who have discrimination have real knowledge, which is not based on logic or events, but based on a pure sense, which makes the person know the difference between a pure note and discord. This is interesting. Discrimination is called buddhi in Sanskrit, which is spiritual insight and intuitive perception. That's discrimination in Sanskrit, called buddhi. So discrimination is related to our ability to know the difference between the things that are useful to us and to others, and the things that are useless or even dangerous for us and for others. It is to know what is right and what is wrong in any given situation. Imagine to have that kind of intuitive perception. Well, let's not imagine it, let's be it. Let's have that kind of intuitive perception. But to do so requires discrimination and the practice of the science of observation. The teaching says this is how we can see the difference between the expression of the true self and the not self. The teaching gives us 3 points of view to discover just what is the ruler of our life. What is ruling our life? What is ruling our thoughts and words and actions? The first point is this. There's 3 of them. The ruler of my life is I. The ruler of my life is I. I am my actions. That's me. I am my feelings. I am my thoughts. I am one with all kinds of inner and outer, this is identification. I am one with all kinds of inner and outer influences which rule my life. See, this is identification in which we lower ourselves. So that's the first point. The second point is a little better. I am not sure who is the ruler of my life. One day, I am me. The other day, I do not know where I am or who I am. That's the second point. And then finally, the third point. I, the self, I, that capital S self, I, the true self, am the ruler of the not self. These are pretty interesting questions if we want to take ourselves to task and our spiritual progress to heart. In all three, we can recognize that there is this capital S self, and then there is the mechanism of the self. So what the teaching is telling us is that the personality is the mechanism of the capital S self. The personality is the lower self, of the higher self. The personality has the option to follow the direction or to drag the capital S self into its involutionary tendencies. Isn't that interesting? So we must observe if we are the capital S self that is thinking through us, or is it the not self? Is it the capital S self that is acting, or the not self? Once we are able to see the difference between these 2 points, then we can say that we have this sword. We have the power of discrimination. But this is only half of it. Wouldn't you think that was enough? But this is only half of it. The other half is that real discrimination is not only an awareness, it's an awareness of our true self and the not self, but the actualization of the true self in all circumstances. All circumstances. So discrimination is not only knowingness, but it's beingness. Knowingness and beingness. For example, if you don't know the difference between a lie and a truth, fact or fantasy, it does not make any difference until you side with the truth. If you don't know the difference between a lie and a truth, fact or fantasy, it does not make any difference until you side with the truth. It is this attitude which is called discrimination. If you know the difference between light and darkness, you are halfway to discrimination. But if you side with light in all your actions, then you have discrimination. That's beingness. Knowingness and beingness. The capital self and the not self is all there is. It is through the process of discrimination that this not self must be used in a way that it becomes able to manifest the glory of the capital S self. And the capital S self will be able to serve the not self and release it gradually, release this mechanism gradually toward the self. People who are servants of the not self try to forbid us from seeing that beautiful, beautiful capital S self. And those who are leading us, like the teaching is leading us to the capital S self, are slandered by the enemies of this beautiful self. Making people, how do they do this? What are the enemies of the self? They make people believe that they are becoming slaves, that we are becoming slaves to our teachers, to our guides, and thereby losing our independence. Isn't that interesting? But those who have developed their discrimination will see that real freedom is shown to them by those who are trying to teach them how to overcome their glamours and separatism and illusions and inertia. 2 men came to a teacher sitting under a tree. One of them asked the teacher, "Respected teacher, is there a fountain nearby? I'm really thirsty." "Yes," said the teacher. "There's a mountain 3 miles away with really good water and beautiful big trees. The other man said, no, you're mistaken. The water is 10 miles away, and the man will not be able to survive. That person next to me will not be able to survive walking those 10 miles. Dark-hearted man, said the teacher, you know that the water can be reached in less than 3 miles, but you want him to stay here so that you can rob him. The thirsty man said, I will listen to the teacher and go another 3 miles. This is how travelers on the path are tempted by dark forces. They do not want people to know the facts, because when people know the facts, the dark ones will lose their servants. Isn't that interesting? It's beautiful. It is better to listen to a teacher than to be the slave of our glamours, illusions, and inertia. Once a teacher said to an aspirant, do not fight against me when I am trying to free you from your vices, from alcoholism, lust, and stealing. You cannot be free unless you conquer these enemies. By freeing you from your enemies, the teacher says, I am helping you be an independent being. Living in accordance with the laws of nature will lead you to happiness and health and prosperity and independence. Without discrimination, we cannot advance on the path, because the path becomes reality when we detach ourselves from the not self and the slaves of the not self. One day, a daughter was screaming to her father, do not tell me what to do. I am not your slave. Remember, if you're a parent, all those teenage kids you had, how many of them said, don't tell me what to do. I am not your, well, they didn't say they were our slave. You can't control me. That's, the teenager. I want to do whatever I want to do, and I'm going to do whatever I want to do. Okay, so here's the father very patiently saying, but my dear daughter, the real you is not the one who is using drugs and consuming alcohol and sleeping around. I am trying to set you free from these vices. Don't you understand? Well, if you've ever watched television, there's a program called Dr. Phil. I love to watch it. I don't watch it very often, but when I do, it's a psychological up, because here's Dr. Phil talking to mom and dad, and here's the bratty little teenager sitting over here blaming, mom and dad for their stupidities of trying to get them to stop this and stop that. So the story is significant, not only as parents, how we treat our children and help free them and liberate them from identification and control, of these vices. It is also for those of us now who are grown up, is to listen to the teacher. And that teacher can be the teaching. It can be an earthly teacher. It can be, if you're in contact with the master. The practice of the science of observation, the practice of obedience, the practice of discrimination is how we liberate ourselves and free ourselves from these vices. So the actual potential of our unfolding human soul is going to manifest, and our whole life will be a completely different life in our next lifetime. It will start now, but it will begin to flower and fully blossom in our next life. So the daughter said, okay, I don't want to be free. This is after the father said, I'm trying to set you free of all these vices. And don't you understand? And the daughter said, okay, I don't want to be free. The father said, but one minute you were saying, I don't want to be your slave. You are not my slave, dear daughter, but the slave of your vices. Can't you see it? I am here to help you overcome them. Oh, leave me alone. You can't tell me what to do, says the little girl. I wish you could see that it is not you who wishes to do anything you want. Try to see that, said the father. So the daughter had no discrimination. Those who escape from themselves, close their eyes to their weaknesses, are the most miserable people and most miserable slaves. The child in us, children must develop discrimination before they are attacked by the night self. I really dislike that whole psychology of the child within. You know, I'm sorry to say it, but I truly, truly dislike it, because that child within is not our unfolding human soul. That child within is the accumulation of all those vices and identifications that says, I want to play. So if you are spiritually an adult, throw that psychology out, because we want to replace that child within with the power of the true self. So now you know my pet peeve. On the path of discrimination, the real person discovers also that he has a personality and the human soul. In the majority of cases, human beings have not yet discriminated between the fact that they have a personality and a soul. This is the cause of various problems of health, moral, and political upheavals. When we are identified with the personality life, we reverse the currents that are carrying us to unity, synthesis, and purification. Discrimination allows us to find our path through the labyrinth of influences and forge ahead toward their spiritual glory. We can never advance if we cannot see those things or people that are helping us to proceed toward higher levels of consciousness, and those things that are trying to obscure our path and keep us a slave to their power. Every true leader and teacher has only one goal, which is to help people realize themselves, to help them liberate their true identity and proceed on the path of unity and perfection. So let me wrap up with this. Discrimination works with the law of attraction and repulsion. This is just an idea for you to consider and think about and research. How discrimination works with the law of attraction and repulsion. The things chosen are attracted and used. The things not chosen, listen to this, the things that are not chosen are left aside and rejected. The things not chosen are left aside and rejected. Intuition plays the main role in our discrimination, as intuition is the reality. It is, in reality, the purpose and the goal for which we discriminate. Intuition. Our discrimination is based upon the level upon which our senses operate. Physical senses are used for discrimination, but if our astral, mental, and intuitional senses are in action, our discrimination then will be more accurate. See, this is some insight for us to really think about, to say, well, I have this sort of discrimination. Why did I make the wrong choice? See, it has to do with the level of consciousness and the control center of our soul, where it is. The goal of discrimination is to lead our soul toward continuous transmutation. And I think I'll end with that.